Welcome back, everybody, to, well, an actual next day update on more Sceptre Throne. Yeah, we're here to talk about chapters 17, 18, and 19. We're nearing the end. We'll be done tomorrow, if I get the time to record a video tomorrow, which is a bit doubtful. We'll see how that goes. But here we are talking about Malazan some more. And then, well, I guess I'll take a Malazan break until Monday. And we'll start with Blood and Bone on Monday, if all goes well, which who the fuck knows at this point. Anyways, that's sort of where we are right now. I've also noticed that I've almost reached the end of all my t-shirts, so you might see some repetition there. Not sure if that's an actual achievement or not, though. So here we are with the introduction stuff. Let's have us a bit of a talk on Sceptre Throne, shall we? Well, cheers. All right, so we're definitely reaching the climax of the story, and thus there's a lot of action and maybe not so much deep philosophizing going on. So I'll start out with stuff that I kind of didn't talk about yesterday that I feel is interesting and is important to look at today as well. Because, it was important yesterday, but, my brain being my brain, I kind of forgot about it. So yeah. What do I mean? I mean, two things. A quick one on the gender fluidity of everyone's favorite elder god being Karul. The discussion of whether Karul is male or female. And that discussion is obviously irrelevant. And the good part is, that's exactly what Cam Asselmond tells us, or in this case, Pickard tells us when they're starting to argue about it. And Pickard just says, like, Spindle, shut up, get your priorities straight. Which, that's exactly how it is. Get your priorities straight. Gender is a personal thing. So that's that. Just wanted to point that out because, it's an interesting aspect of how we deal with these kind of things in fiction. The other part is the more important, more interesting part, and that is the healing, or maybe not healing, of Teishren, or Fenage, or both. So we remember that, for whatever reason, the stick thing that they got from the Queen of Dreams, as soon as Kiska gives that one to Fenage, he falls down, and then he apparently regains his, memories and shit, and understands that he is also Teishren and has to make a decision. Now, the important bit here for me is how he thinks, how Teishren and Fenage thinks that he has to decide whether he wants to be the one person or the other person, and Kiska says, no, you can be both, and find some sort of compromise. And that is an important aspect here, because we can see that as as how we as persons deal with our past oftentimes, right? We haven't, I guess some of us at least, have done shit in the past that we're not exactly proud of, and we try to be a different person. And oftentimes we do that by shutting out parts of our personality. And some parts that we shut out tend to be also important aspects of our personalities. Actually finding that compromise within ourselves to actually, be the sum total of all the things that we have done and that we have been in the past is a very hard thing to do, but it is probably the only real way forward. And ideally, we also find for ourselves goals in life that we want to actually achieve, and it seems that Teishren has found one of those goals. We don't yet know exactly what that goal will be, but I'm pretty sure we'll find out relatively soon. So, there we are. That's that bit. From yesterday, basically. Now let's have us a look at stuff that is happening in this one. And I think the most important aspect here is the warfare aspect. That being the way the the Segula first attack the Malazans and the Rivi and slaughter way too many of both sides, and then are just like bombed out of the sky by the Moranth. And once again, this is what I said, yesterday, I guess, when I said that while the Segula may have been like able to defeat the Moranth in the past, drive them away, the Segula have not exactly evolved as a culture. Now, they have maybe perfected sword fighting, but that's about it. Segula culture, in its nature, is stagnant, is very stagnant, just like, say, Barghest culture was very stagnant. And all these other cultures are very stagnant, whereas Moranth culture is continuously evolving. They're like experimenting, coming up with new ways to deal with problems, all of that. And the Malazan Book of the Fallen and the Malazan novels and the Malazan universe in general is one that deals with the fact that time moves ever onwards, and with all the tragic losses that brings with itself. It brings with it losses of culture, losses of specific ways of living, and so forth, and how we deal with those, how changes in technology and stuff like that, how that will affect identity. It's one of the things that we see with the Rivi still attacking the Segula. They know they're going to lose, but it's like, if we don't attack them, we lose who we really are. And on the other hand, we have, the Segula just being bombed out of the sky, and almost all, large part of them just killed outright by superior weaponry and, a sky attack. That is just, pretty fucking horrible. But it's how the Malazan universe works. It's how the Malazan world works. We have these, technological progress doesn't care about all these other bits. It obviously, once again, deals with and parallels the feelings of soldiers in our lifetime, not our lifetime, but in our world, being faced with changes in warfare, right? I mean, there's that whole idea of the samurai being gunned down because, they thought attacking with swords is a good idea when people have firearms and that kind of thing. But we also have that whole idea that in those situations, say World War I, when you use gas and have the first tanks showing up, when warfare suddenly becomes actual, war and not so much combat, if that makes sense, how soldiers suddenly feel more compassion with their opposite numbers being taken down by these modern weapons than you might think. And we have the same going on here, because the warfare, actual Moranth warfare as portrayed there, displayed here, would mean basically the end of regular Malazan warfare as well. Ground warfare is completely changed by by Air Force, basically, which is what we have here. And to recognize that, to recognize the intrinsic tragedy of all of that, is obviously a very human trait, and it's important to see that displayed by the Malazan soldiers in this situation. The other bit that we see is obviously the inner, intrinsic Malazan defiance, when they know they can't lose. It's kind of they can't win. It's kind of the same thing that you have with the Rivi when they go and attack the Segula against, because it's our way of life. When you have Aragon do the speech, and that means we still have another chance at the bastards, and if we give up, we'll never have a chance to actually show them. It triggers that human defiance that is so important, such an important part of human nature. And it's once again one of those important parts of human nature that the Malazan Book of the Fallen and the novels of the Malazan Empire again and again and again take recourse to and show. It's we as humans are by nature defiant bastards. We hate giving up. We hate giving in. We hate losing. And that's something that we see in that scene as well. So it's a very well done scene in all its tragedy. Because on the other side, you see the Moranth, who are very much about, at this point, about just full-on victory and destruction of a threat, which we then see when it comes to their plan to just level the entire city of Daruzistan, because, you know, that's that will take care of their ancient enemy, and that will solve the problem once and for all. Now, is that a good thing to do? I don't know. I live in a country that needed some heavy bombing to kind of get back on the right track by a couple of years ago, so I do have views on that topic. But I feel it's important to see how this form of warfare is very much just about a victory, and does not take civilian suffering into account. It's what we might call total war, basically. And the form of war that you have with the Malazans or the Segula is a different one. It's still your, in that regard, more medieval warfare. I can't call it medieval, but, you know, where you have rules of war, rules of engagement. You go somewhere, you meet on a field of battle, you punch each other until one side has won, one side has lost. You don't just take out an entire city. Those rules of warfare have been abandoned in a way in the last, I don't know, 200 years or so in our part of the world, at least, where it comes to warfare. We tend to no longer care about that. It's a huge issue. It's like, how do we actually talk about morality or morals in warfare if, like, one party involved, that being, you know, civilians, have, like, no voice at the table, which is where, like, ethics of warfare come in, which is, I feel that I have, like, no idea. I just know it exists. So just saying, like, we have certainly with civil wars stuff that is going on in the Middle East right now, but, like, also, like, how the First and Second World War treated large parts of the civilian population. We have come to that, like, warfare, like, victory is no longer declared on a battlefield. It's a very different approach, and the Moranth are very much part of that kind of culture. The Malazans are not. But then again, the Moranth probably don't plan to occupy Daruzistan. They just want to take that threat out. So they go for, like, firebombing the entire city. We will see where that will lead. So far, it hasn't happened yet. And there's reasons why it hasn't happened, and we're going to talk about those now. One interesting aspect of these Malazan novels is that they use a lot of elements from all kinds of other stories that are familiar. We've spoken about that before, right? The whole story, Ansie's walk through Moonspawn, is basically a dungeon crawl with all the different aspects of that. You have your group. It's sort of survival horror, basically, and runs the classic dungeon crawl that you would play in your tabletop RPG game. Now we come to a different aspect, and that is basically the heist story in a way, because with that circle built up completely around Majesty Hall by the Tyrant, what we get is more or less a locked room, a locked house, and everyone needs to figure out how to get in there. Brute force seems to not work perfectly. We'll see how badly it'll work, and so forth, but you can't bomb the living shit out of it. At the same time, we have people trying to figure out a way to actually solve riddles, to deactivate the security measures there, and actually get the stuff done on a sneakier level, which is what Spindle is trying to do, and not really successful until he finally realizes it by the help of their other expert, that being Daika, the historian, when they figure out that it's somehow magically reinforced alabaster. Now they're looking for acids to take the thing apart, and now you have that whole timetable. Like, will they be able to sabotage the ring in time to actually get something done? How will all of that work out? We don't know yet, but it's just interesting to see that part work. Also, it gives us another look at Chillbase and the demon, and thus the chance for Cam Asselman to inject some of his his humor and comic relief into an otherwise really dark story at this point, where you can just go and you know do really funny slapstick stuff with a demon, which I personally find really funny. So there's that bit that is just to lighten the mood for a second. Yeah. What else is important in these couple of chapters? I want to go back a bit to Yusek and see what's going on there. Why do I want to go that? Yusek is extremely poor, and what I want to talk about here is that situation when Yusek and Saul are trying to buy the ship, the boat to get over, and all of that stuff. Because in her thoughts, and it's something that starts early on, but it kind of keeps on going, because of her specific background as a refugee, and then being in these criminal situations. She doesn't even consider becoming a rich, powerful, successful, or whatever through legal means or anything like that. Her idea of being well off is being able to eat duck and having a bath, which, while slightly comic in the way it is written down, it's also super tragic. And all her ideas is wow, she can get Saul to actually join up with her, and then they'll be bandits because they're really, really good swordsmen, or he's a really good swordsman, so they can just kill all the rich merchants and take their stuff. So, and this is a very, very important point, because it means that unless Yusek gets a specific form of education, or at least a broader horizon at the world, crime is her only way, the only way that she knows for success, which is something that we can see in our world as well. It's the whole idea of that if you grow up in with a specific social background, your goal will not be to become a successful business person or have a well-paying job, but your goal is to become a criminal, a gangster, so to speak. And you can see the same going on with Bendon, Butcher. See, I can't remember his name this time around. Isn't that great? With Bendon being similar in a way, because he comes from that same situation. It's our social background has a huge influence on our worldview and on the way we can act, because our worldview will necessarily limit our possibilities of action in the future, because we can't, depending on what background we have, we are completely unable, almost physically unable, to imagine a different way of doing things. So even if we have all the talents needed, all the skills needed to choose a different path in life, we're kind of incapable of actually imagining that path of life, and that's why we'll never take it. Which is why it is so important to make sure that everyone has a much broader mind, and hopefully the capability to actually, don't just become another highwayman, because, wouldn't it be glorious if people would not have to be criminals to survive? I think that's pretty neat, all things considered. All right, what else was important in these 3 chapters? Well, Ansi and the rest are back and are sent through Geralt Galain to the Temple of Shadow, of all places. We kind of get some more hints at who Morn is. And we get some hints who Orchid is, because Orchid is part Teist Andy, and also part Draconic, which I assume is that whole idea is like I mean, I have no idea what her ancestry is. I probably don't even want to know at this point. But yeah, so we have that situation going on there, and her idea that she has to find out these things. And this is important once again because that's one of the things that we see with her, and we see with Kiska, and in a way we also see it with Teishren again. It's like we need to find out who we really are. It's an innate drive for most of us to really figure out who we are and find out these things about ourselves. You're right. We have one final thing to talk about that I found fascinating, and that's the whole story with Kiska and the old woman and the coals and whatnot in the Mountain of Drek on Kartul. And I just want to look at what happens there, right? So Teishren jumps into the mountain to talk to Drek or do whatever he does down there, and as soon as he's gone, Kiska encounters an old blind woman who talks to her about first how Drek's job is to be that river of molten fire and whatnot that needs to be like keep the world going, which is a really interesting metaphor for why maybe presumably the planet of the Malazan universe that we're talking about here has a molten core, or like at least a part is partly molten, just like our Earth. And yeah, it's an interesting metaphor for that. And then she goes with Kiska to look at specific braziers to keep them going, to keep the heat going. And while obviously nothing is fully explained here, there's a strong hint that that old woman is a manifestation of Drek as well, right? And I just wanted to point out how that is a very it is a very classic story connected told like a lot of classic mythologies where people meet some old person or whatever and help them do something and then just later realize that they actually had contact with whatever deity we're talking about here, whether it's your Saint Christophorus taking God, Jesus Christ, or whatever over the ford, or your average, I don't know, Norse mythology when you once again meet that like one-eyed bastard who's doing whatever and you help him and then it turns out it was Odin. Shit like that. It's a classic tale in a way, and it's interesting to see how these patterns of like classic stories are then readapted and turned around and made to fit part of the specific approach of the Malazan world to all these things. So there's that, and once again I enjoyed that. All right. Was there more? Well, probably a lot that I've just forgotten. And yeah, I feel I can't remember anything really more. I mean, we have these small bits of Lady Envy being still being extremely arrogant and whatnot. We have the whole idea of like the impatience of Tyre, which will probably, hopefully, whatever, be her undoing at some point. We have a lot of those funny, like short, funny scenes with Scorch and Leth, of course. All of that stuff ongoing, those small bits and pieces that make the world move over are really, are still there, and that's obviously part of the fun. But we still kind of need to figure out where all of this will be going. Will Daruzistan be taken, will Daruzistan be completely bombed off the map, or will we actually manage to save the day in some form or other? I guess we'll find out tomorrow. I could, yeah. Let's keep it at that. I just remembered that I wanted to talk about the whole, like, Eben talking to the mask of the tyrant, realizing that it's always the same tyrant doing the thing over and over again and always failing, which gives you interesting views on history and on the circularity of history, how the circularity of history is maybe part of the problem, right? It's sort of the thing that you see when you read Thucydides, and he starts out with, like, explaining how those wars come again and again and again. It's like, I write this down so once you're in the same situation, because that same situation will come again because it's human nature, you maybe will find a way out of it. And we see the same thing going on here as well, because apparently that part runs circular, and no one has figured out how to stop that circularity happen and how to prevent the tyrant from rising again. And the tyrant, on the other hand, has not found a way to actually prevent the escalation that he obviously provokes every time he gets into power. Will there be a final ending this time round? Another one of those questions that we'll answer tomorrow, maybe, hopefully. Anyway, that's it for tonight. I'll talk to you tomorrow about the rest of Orb Sceptre Throne, and yeah, cheers.